Welcome to Movie Recall. In today's video, we will be going through the 2019 movie Simon's Got a Gift. It's time to recall. Let's get started, turn on subtitles, and spoilers ahead. 8-year-old orphan Simon, who has an incredible power, take on the look of people he has already touched. One night during a carnival, a man approaches a cotton candy stand. After consuming the cotton candy, the guy goes into an orphanage and he is in children's pajamas. He then goes to bed as Simon. Madame Gautran, the orphanage's director, welcomes a driver later, indicating the children are ready for their trip to town. Simon smoothens his shirt while the orphans run around the home, expecting to be adopted soon. Later that day, Simon separates from the others and goes to the engine room to hide. Thomas enters from a hatch, sneaking cake and a bottle of wine for themselves. A girl named Madeline unexpectedly stares at him from the other side. When Thomas notices Simon staring at them, he invites him over to share their meal. Simon reveals that he was abandoned as a baby at the orphanage. Many years later, the trio then hears the siblings' parents searching for them. Strong Hand suddenly sees Madeline as she hides, followed by Thomas, who tries to flee. Simon, wishing for a family, watches his pals laugh with their father Jacques and mother Agnes. Days later, Madame Gautran phones Simon to tell him that Jacques' son wishes to invite him to their home for the weekend. The orphan, overjoyed, accepts the offer and gladly returns to his room. When the weekend arrives, Jacques picks up Simon and drives him to their home. Later that night, Simon peers through Madeline's door, observing Agnes help her daughter in wearing her nasal cannula to assist her in her breathing. The kids continue to have fun in the dark by turning on their flashlights. When Jacques enters the dining room the next day with Thomas's birthday cake, the celebrant immediately blows out the candles. Simon and Madeline laugh as they too blow it, while Jacques tries lighting it again. Following a game of charades, the boys challenge Jacques to a pillow fight, so Madeline gives Simon the heaviest pillow so he can attack her father. He asks Simon if he wants to be their blood brother for life, explaining that they must combine their blood and expose each other's greatest secret. Simon is eager to be a part of the family. Then Thomas slashes his palm and draws blood on a glass ashtray, followed by Madeline and Simon. Thomas reveals his secret, confessing he saw his mother naked. Then Madeline laments that she doesn't have any friends. According to her parents, when pressed to divulge an unspoken reality, Madeline claims that she won't survive more than 20 years. Simon asks them to keep their brotherhood despite his weird secret. Then Simon magically transforms into another boy before returning, shocking the siblings. Simon turns into another boy's appearance and reverts at Thomas's request, revealing that he can only replicate someone's appearance if he has touched them. He then displays that his wound has vanished after shifting, making him question whether he is eternal, as Thomas says. Nonetheless, Madeline insists that Simon keep his scar to prove they're blood brothers. The three retired to their bedrooms. Simon hears heaving gasps from Madeline's chamber later in the night. When he walks in, he notices the girl catching her breath and relaxing. Simon embraces Madeline's hand and transforms into her, curious about her anguish. He suddenly feels the same ache in his chest and battles for breath, so he turns back. The next day, Madeline presents Simon with a pink raincoat that her mother had purchased for him. The girl unexpectedly kisses him on the cheek. Then Thomas walks in, irritated by the color of their matching raincoats. As the two boys explore the woods, Thomas gives Simon his pocket knife so that he can dig a tunnel out of the orphanage. Thomas joyfully begins the race after placing a branch on a walkway to indicate their starting place. Simon lags because of his diminutive stature, but he transforms into an athlete and races past Thomas. As the couple continues to run, Thomas shouts out to Simon to halt, but he slips and falls into a deep ravine. When Simon hears his friend scream, he searches for him and stumbles upon the cliff. That night, Jacques leads a search party into the woods in search of the two boys. When Simon hears the group calling out their names, he realizes that they're looking for Thomas in particular. When Simon sees the disheartened family outside the window, he decides to return as Thomas. Agnes quickly opens the door for Thomas. Madeline witnesses her alleged brother being questioned by authorities. The phony Thomas recounts the occurrence, which concerns Madame Gautran. Concerned that they would uncover Thomas's body, Simon claims they became disoriented, blaming himself for his friend's absence. Simon enters his new room later that night and Madeline follows. Suspiciously, the girl inquires as to whether indeed he is Thomas and examines his packed wound, leading her to assume Simon has vanished. The orphanage staff gathers over Simon's empty grave. Years later, a much older Madeline is advised by Dr. Badditt on what not to eat, but she refuses to listen. The concerned doctor advises her to be cautious about her health because there is a long waiting list for a heart transplant. Madeline leaves the hospital in tears, frustrated by her unchanging state. While Jacques is cleaning his car outside his mirror shop, a young woman enters to claim her order, specifically asking for Thomas. When a much older Thomas hands the customer her package, on Thomas's birthday, the Durant family and friends come to see him open his gifts. Then Jacques offers his son a gift, a mirrored plaque with both of their names for the shop, signifying that he is passing over control of the business to him. Madeline comes unexpectedly with her boyfriend on his motorbike. Madeline approaches her brother, not aware that her father has already revealed his plans. Jacques gathers his pals that evening to criticize the celebrant's images. Little Simon's picture pops on the screen, taking everyone by surprise as the pleased parents narrate tales behind the scanned pictures on a slideshow. Later that night, Thomas looks in his mirror and, for the first time, transforms into his original visage as a grown-up Simon. While traveling around town, Thomas notices a telescope exhibited at a store and rushes inside to check it out. However, he comes to a halt when he sees the blonde woman inside. Simon, hesitant to approach her, slips into his own flesh and purchases the telescope without drawing the woman's notice. Following that, Simon eagerly purchases a plate of fries, missing the flavor of the dish due to his impersonation of a man allergic to potatoes. The young man is surprised to see Madeline peering at him through the glass, recognizing his features. Simon glances aside anxiously, thinking she doesn't realize who he is. When Simon returns home, he changes his shirt quickly as Madeline knocks on his door. The young woman is adamant that her childhood buddy Simon is still alive and shows Thomas a stolen photo of Simon at the cafe on her phone. Simon, unable to see his portrait, refutes Madeline's assertions, claiming that Simon is dead. Madeline goes out in frustration. The next day, Simon notices a person's sign with his photo from Madeline, who distributes identical flyers to passers-by. Simon buys new clothes while he reverts to his previous shape, thinking of a means to stop Madeline. Simon visits the cafe where he was last seen with purpose, only to discover Madeline inside, discreetly waiting for him. Simon takes his seat after capturing the woman's attention. Madeline approaches and inquires whether he is Simon. Simon, on the other hand, gently rejects it. Madeline approaches and looks away. She now has difficulties breathing, so Simon takes her outdoors for fresh air. As Madeline calms down, she asks his name, and Simon responds that his name is Michel. The waitress then brings Michel's fries. Michel is irritated by his apathy to Madeline's predicament, so he pretends to be uninterested while eating his fries. Madeline receives a text message from her parents. Michel receives one at the same time and texts a rapid response. Before leaving, the woman writes her phone number on the paper plate, hinting that she is also interested. Thomas is watching Madeline at a dinner, awaiting a text from Michel, unaware that she is in the same room as him. Thomas purchases another phone. Soon after, the two go on a date at the beach, where Madeline shows him her hidden retreat. Michel kisses her. On their second date, Madeline walks Michel through the woods to their house and into her room. When Madeline notices he is unusually silent due to her intentions, she reveals her days are numbered and kisses him. When Michel hears the Durants come, he rushes to get dressed and go, but Madeline insists on introducing him. Downstairs, Jacques and Agnes greet Michel, unaware that he is the same person they have known for years. The young man, however, locks eyes with Jacques, who appears to recognize his features. Madeline reveals to Thomas one night while sleeping in the woods around a bonfire that she is hopelessly in love with Michel. Then Madeline notices Thomas is staring at her in the same manner Michel did, forcing her to get up and go back to bed. The next day, Madeline goes through her brother's belongings in search of the identical shirt Michel is wearing in the lost poster. Michel phones and waits for Madeline in the cafe, who is suspiciously watching him from a distance. Michel departs to fetch Thomas's clothing from a rucksack he's hiding in the woods when she doesn't show up. Madeline, unbeknownst to Simon, watches his transformation from Michel to Thomas, confirming her darkest fears. Soon later, Michel confronts Thomas in his chamber, exposing her knowledge of his secret and addressing him as Simon. Simon, distraught, halts her outburst and reverts to his natural personality, leaving Madeline in anguish. When the aggrieved woman recovers, she asks about the whereabouts of her biological brother. As Simon leads Madeline into the deep ravine where Thomas died, she asks him to tell her parents the truth. Simon, on the other hand, proposes to flee rather than subject Jacques and Agnes to the deception. Enraged, Madeline accuses him of being a coward, claims her parents don't care about him, and vows to find another method to demonstrate his power. As Madeline walks away, Simon tearfully professes his love for her. In response to Madeline's request, the police, commanded by Commissioner Leroy, surround the ravine in order to recover the remains of the deceased youngster. Following that, the officer interrogates Thomas in her office, showing him a photo of the Macintosh and inquiring about Simon. The urn has been put within Simon's once empty grave since the boy's bones were discovered. Madeline weeps silently and glares at Thomas, who excuses himself and runs home, knowing it's her brother inside. Thomas collects his belongings and is prepared to depart, believing he has no other alternative but to go when the Durants arrive. Thomas believes he suffocated at home. To warn Jacques of her stubbornness, Madeline points a firearm at Thomas and shoots the ceiling. Disgusted, she threatens Thomas with revealing his actual identity. When the young man takes a step, Madeline shoots him in the stomach, prompting Jacques to seize the shotgun from his daughter. While Agnes summons an ambulance, Madeline exhorts Thomas to change and save himself from the fatal wound. As he returns as Simon, Thomas claims to be sad and tells the Durants that he loves them. Madeline reveals that Simon replaced Thomas, whom they buried earlier, while Jacques and Agnes back away from the strange guy in horror. Jacques accuses Simon of shoving his kid as he prepares to depart. When confronted, Simon denies and refers to himself as his father, prompting Jacques to toss him in wrath. Eventually, Jacques strangles Simon outdoors as the cops approach. To flee, Simon disguises himself as Thomas, surprising Jacques and the bystanders as he seizes the chance. Commissioner Leroy attempts to stop the young guy, but he quickly drives away with the police car, leaving Madeline in anguish. Simon flees on foot after being apprehended by the police in town. When they arrive at a crowd, Leroy notices a discarded bloody shirt on the ground, implying that the escapee has changed into another person. A month later, Madeline returns her gaze to a police officer standing nearby, fearing Simon is following them. Madeline is startled to discover an elderly guy looking at her in grief. She approaches him, seeing him as Simon, but Agnes calls her back. Madeline drops her cane and races towards her boyfriend in his original form, whom she kisses lovingly, declaring her love regardless of who he is as she returns to her mother. Madeline instructs Simon to take her as they flee, fearful of the cops observing them. Madeline, on the other hand, lags behind and collapses to the ground as her illness worsens. As Agnes approaches, Simon is unable to carry Madeline with his body, so he transforms into Jacques in front of the crowd and dashes into the car. When Dr. Badet arrives at the hospital, he rushes Madeline to the emergency room. Soon later, Commissioner Leroy's troops flood the premises in search of Simon, requesting that everyone's identification be verified individually. While Simon is waiting for an update, the true Jacques arrives and informs Agnes about the police. As the young man transforms into an old man, Agnes tells her husband Simon that he assisted her, insisting that they prioritize Madeline. When Dr. Badet returns, he informs the Durants that Madeline requires immediate surgery, but she is still on the transplant waiting list. Unfortunately, Jacques' heart is unsuited for his daughter, so the doctor urges them to say their final farewells while Simon sobs silently. When Simon notices officers approaching, he flees and disguises himself as a doctor. He then steals some medication from the storage room while dressed in a coat. When Officer Dennis stops Simon to verify his identity, the real physician notices him and flees. When Dennis is looking for Simon, Commissioner Leroy arrives and demands the stamp. Dennis, suspicious of the lady, radios the actual Leroy, not realizing he is talking to Simon. The criminal, on the other hand, knocks the officer senseless, changes into Dennis, and steals his belongings. Simon approaches the guards outside Madeline's chamber, now dressed as Leroy, and grants her admission. She informs Jacques and Agnes that the exits are locked, meaning he is unable to flee, and requests a moment alone with Madeline. Agnes and Jacques leave the room after realizing she's Simon, enabling him to reconnect with his dying daughter. The guards are stunned when they see the genuine Leroy. When the officer bursts into the room, she discovers Simon dead on the bed, clutching Madeline. Leroy discovers a message on Simon's hand, urging them to save Madeline after realizing Simon committed suicide with a chemical. Simon and Madeline's bodies are getting ready for a heart transplant in order to fulfill his ultimate desire. Soon after, the Durants weep in the cemetery, where the urns of the two sons are correctly placed under the respective names, formally naming Simon Durant. As the media focuses on the scandalous family, Madeline flees, living her second life with her lover's heart. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get new movie recaps.